Do you hear her barking? Are you picking it up on this? Oh, look at this. It's all tangled up now too. She put it in a box and she wrapped it all up. And she didn't tell me this. I found it um in a box on the with all this other stuff like hair dryers and whatever. And she didn't tell me this because I wrote her several more times and she hasn't responded. Um, and that has me nervous, but it's like, what am I supposed to do? I can't do anything. So anyway, hopefully you can hear me. It's better. You couldn't believe how many people told me that they could hear me fine. And I always take that to mean it's not great. It's not really good. Um, not only can it be better, it's like the lowest acceptable. Like to me, I'm like, no. Because I know before when I didn't have the microphone in this computer and people left and they complained, and I thought, no, I'm gonna worry like that, that's gonna happen. Anyway, I'm glad I found it. So we can start. Ugh, I hate having to like worry about people. Um, I'm gonna try not to. I'm gonna just try to assume. I guess she's on her road trip with my sister. Her phone died. They don't have anywhere to play. I don't know what could happen. Let's read. I missed you. All right. Let's go. I'm gonna pull you guys up. Hi. Okay. Mm. Oh, thank you, Sherry. I'm trying to track which page I was on. Okay. Mm. I think I think here. If not, we're close, but I think here. Lyndon Baines was born in Stonewall, Texas on August 27, 1908. He grew up poor and rode a donkey to school. Awesome. Got into politics early in life and was suspected of stealing elections since high school, directing the stuffing of ballot boxes and the miscounting of votes. A ninth grade schoolmate remembered the 12-year-old Johnson once blurting, "Someday I'm going to be president of the United States." According to the same schoolmate, the other children laughed at Johnson, who said, "I won't vote." So by 1948, the 40-year-old Johnson was elected United States Senator from Texas, a seat that he was also suspected of stealing, a pattern that cries from other politicians, such as "he stole that election" and "that damn Johnson stole some votes again." Johnson's preeminent Pulitzer Prize winning biographer, Robert Caro, wrote, "The first time the suspicions were checked, the results proved to be precisely what Johnson's opponents had charged it would be." In another volume of Caro's multi volume masterpiece on Johnson, oh, it's making me want to read that one too. The author called his subject manipulative, a schemer, unprint. Oh, wait, wasn't that guy like racist, like pretty racist. I just it might be worth reading, but if I say it out loud, it might not be very fun. Um, Unprincipled and unscrupulous, adding that for years men had been handing him checks or sometimes envelopes stuffed with cash, generally plain white letter sized envelopes containing $100 bills. The governor of Texas said of the 1948 election, if the district attorney here had done his duty, Johnson would now be in the penitentiary instead of the United States Senate. Couldn't we say that for most of them, though? One man who attempted to investigate the election was murdered, gangland style. That's not to say that Johnson ordered the hit, but it did indeed happen, and most people believe that the death was connected to the probe, later confirmed by one of the lead suspects. During the 1960 Democratic primary, in which Johnson and Jack Kennedy battled for the nomination, Johnson's team hurled damaging insults at the Kennedy clan, which Bobby took to heart. After one of Johnson's aides compared Joe Kennedy to a Nazi, Bobby told the man, "You Johnson people are running a stinking damn campaign, and you're going to get yours when the time comes." See, isn't that what happened though? That they at the convention he got on the ticket. I think because he had a lot of money and that could help. I'm not sure, but I guess I feel like it's a good indicator that it's not really great to have like a not a vice president that hates you. Uh, I was just wondering. I wonder if they offered Reagan to VP against Ford, but I don't think they could do that. Yeah, sorry. I don't know if he would have taken it anyway. Um, the man then said Bobby was leaning forward, clenching his fist, thrusting his face into mine, before Bobby angrily stomped off. After an especially bitter and contentious primary, Bobby despised Johnson, but, oh, thank you, Mike. Oh, congratulations, everybody. But Joe Kennedy wanted Johnson on the ticket. Joe always got his way. Obviously, it was not Johnson's qualifications that put him on the ticket, wrote the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He was put there to carry Texas and persuade the South. Newsweek wrote that Johnson will help keep the bulk of the South in the Democratic column in November. Few people expected Jack to offer Johnson the bottom half of the ticket, and even fewer thought that Johnson would accept it. Those who knew Johnson knew he was never content to play second fiddle. I mean, does that usually work out that way? Like if you put someone on your ticket, that they carry that state, if they help carry that state? I feel like you could probably make an argument that Vance helped squeak it out in Ohio, but I don't know that it's always the case. I mean, hey, Trump didn't even carry his home state, not even close. So, I mean, maybe the primary, but that won't get you presidency. It's so crazy that Texas went for blue, but okay. He was the main one, and an old friend said of his sportsmanship or lack thereof, if he couldn't lead, he didn't care much about playing. Why then was Johnson prepared to abandon his role as Master of the Senate to play second fiddle to Kennedy? Texas oil tycoon Haroldson Lafayette H.L. Hunt, who was reported to be the richest man in the country, worth an estimated $700 million, give or take a few oil wells, backed Johnson during the primary and was actually with him in his hotel suite when Johnson lost to Kennedy. Hunt was in favor of Johnson accepting the vice presidency, saying, I began to advance the idea that it was his duty to do so 2 days before the presidential balloting. Hunt felt that I his duty, I don't think anyone's ever really turned it down. I can't think, I mean, maybe they wouldn't say it like, "Oh, yeah, I turned it down," because that's just so much power. Who would turn it down? Be like, "I begun to advance the idea." Like, he wouldn't take it. Anything could happen. Perhaps a twist of fate that could put Johnson in the Oval Office. When Johnson accepted Kennedy's offer, a confused Miami Herald wrote, few men in American history have given up so much for so little. After Johnson was installed on the ticket and the election was won, Johnson believed he would have an active role in the administration. But Bobby, who held a bitter grudge against him, convinced his brother to sideline Johnson. Jack sent him on unimportant trips abroad and, according to the president's secretary, began sending him fewer memos and giving him fewer assignments. During the missile crisis, Johnson sided with the Hawks, but his input was not taken into account, nor was he invited to the meeting where Jack made his final decision. Bobby said of that tense time, Johnson had the feeling that we were being too weak and that we should be stronger. Oh, thank you, MM. Bobby was physically and verbally abusive toward Johnson and once told Johnson down in Texas, but Big Lyndon doesn't look so tough to me. Oh my God, did that even happen? Who says that about Texas? I've never heard that. But okay. Once, while Johnson was talking with a group of civil rights leaders, Bobby, who was pressed for time, told an aide, can you tell the vice president to cut it short? The aide felt it was disrespectful to convey that message, so he did not. Bobby then snapped at the aide, saying, didn't I tell you to tell the vice president to shut up? On rare occasions, when Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird, were invited to, that cannot be her real name. That cannot be it. To Ethel Kennedy's Virginia estate, Hickory Hill, the couple were seated at Ethel's losers' table. At cabinet meetings, it was said that Bobby and Johnson literally couldn't look at each other. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who worked for, penned a biography of, and interviewed Johnson, wrote of his implacable anger toward Bobby, and Robert Caro wrote that Johnson found himself increasingly in confrontation with the president's brother. Nicholas Katzenbach, who knew both men well, said Bobby saw LBJ's success as the product of sleaze and manipulation, maybe even corruption, and LBJ saw Bobby's success as that of a spoiled little rich boy. In Washington, D.C., others picked up on the feud, and since the Kennedys held power, they also started to beat up on the beleaguered vice president. Once at a cocktail party, Johnson, who had trouble finding anyone to talk with, dropped in on a conversation between two mid level government employees, but found himself shunned as he despairingly walked away. One of the men said, I think we just insulted the vice president, and the other replied loudly, fuck him. Johnson turned back, but was at a loss for words. Oh, thank you, Chex Mix. Oh, no, I don't need to buy a new mic, but thank you. I found the other one. Oh, thank you, Rob. Uh, You guys do not deserve subpar Mike. Sorry. Actually, remember the night that I was trying to get him like a Target and I had a breakdown. I could anyway. John got me this one, but a few months ago. Okay. By the end of the missile crisis, Johnson was a broken man whose fortunes had plummeted and whose future was bleak. And why would his fortunes have plummeted? I don't know if that's true. Okay, we'll go with it. According to Kenny O'Donnell, Johnson blamed his fallen prestige on Bobby Kennedy, but the Kennedys had created enough enemies to make Johnson a few important friends. The Cubans now wanted him in office. J. Edgar Hoover, who Johnson had lunch with at least once a week, preferred him to the Kennedys. Hoffa wanted to see Kennedy replaced by Johnson, and Carlos Marcello, as one might expect, given his long reach into the world of politics, had been funding Johnson for many years. In Houston, Texas alone, where gambling was controlled by Marcello, Marcello's political fixer, Jack Hoffman, was said to dish out between $50,000 and $100,000 a week in political bribes, and was a major contributor to Lyndon Johnson's House and Senate campaigns. In return for Marcello's money, Johnson killed anti-rackets legislation in committee that would have otherwise decimated Marcello's gambling empire in the Lone Star State, and he curbed congressional investigations into the rackets. This sounds very much to me like it is nowadays with, I mean, for through all times and always, corporations, donors, across, if it wasn't the mafia, it's like, oh, and this person gave, this much money to campaigns every week, or this business. Yeah, they do that. They do be doing that. Um, I guess the only difference is the mafia is considered and is criminal, but I believe many corporations as well are criminal. I mean, I basically they, we shouldn't be buying out politicians. It shouldn't be so easy. Yeah, because it's like to get the rackets killed. It's like to get investigations into their or um, restrictions on their ways of making money. So corrupt, corrupt, corrupt. In a word, some of the most powerful men in the country who all hated Kennedy happened to like Lyndon Johnson. Just as the Kennedy brothers had turned on Allen Dulles after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, they now went after John McCone over the missile crisis. When the Washington Post wrote a story crediting McCone's foresight, Bobby went bananas. Certain it was a CIA leak designed to save McCone from criticism and discredit the president, Jack agreed with Bobby, calling McCone a real bastard. Next, Bobby went after William Harvey, who denied that he had received an order to stand down during the crisis. Bobby browbeat him, calling his unauthorized sabotage missions with Johnny Roselli half-assed and accusing him of being indifferent to people's lives. Not one to back down, Harvey got into a screaming match with the Attorney General in which they called each other liars and sons of bitches. Before Bobby left the room in a huff, Harvey yelled, "If you fuckers hadn't dumped the Bay of Pigs, we would have not been in this mess. Fucking mess." Hey, tempers are heated. Director McCone was certain Harvey had destroyed himself, but Harvey's CIA protectors worked fast to get him out of Bobby's sight, transferring him across the ocean, where he picked up as the new station chief in Rome before departing for Italy. The FBI observed Harvey, who now hated Bobby as much as the disgraced Allen Dulles, the humiliated J. Edgar Hoover, the persecuted Jimmy Hoffa, and the recently kidnapped Carlos Marcello. Carousing with his pal Johnny Rosselli, Harvey and Rosselli went deep sea fishing together, shared dinner in Miami, and then traveled to the Florida Keys where they drank and lodged at the Plantation Yacht Marina. I think we can accurately imagine what they talked about. In January 1963, Bobby buzzed J. Edgar Hoover to his office and all but scolded the elderly hmm, director for the Bureau's lax attitude toward Carlos Marcello. The next month, Hoover sent a teletype to New Orleans, directing his field agents to intensify their efforts against the Bayou Boss. Hardly anything was done in response to Hoover's directive, leaving us to wonder why. Did the field agents know the directive was only sent to placate the Attorney General? Or had Marcello corrupted the agents along with everyone else in Louisiana? Wanted to see if my sister wrote me, and she didn't say yet. Okay. Or had Marcello corrupted the agents along with everyone else in Louisiana? Even if the agents were not corrupted, how far would they get with an investigation when Marcello controlled the state's political machinery, including the governor and New Orleans district attorney's office? While hoping to retire, Hoover or indelibly smear him as a homosexual, Bobby seized an opportunity to disgrace him in public by parading a real life mobster before America's television sets. The Rackets Committee, where Bobby had first launched his attack on organized crime, was dissolved in March 1960, but a permanent subcommittee on investigations was kept open. Bobby worked closely with his old colleague, Senator John McClellan, to bring about televised hearings that featured Genovese family turncoat Joe Valachi as the government star witness. Hoover was not happy about this development. Oh, thank you, Milemo. Nor were other heads of law enforcement who felt that Bobby was using Valachi for his personal agenda. In August 1963, Valachi was transferred to a jail in Washington in preparation for his congressional testimony, which began on September 26. When Valachi walked into the Senate caucus room dressed in a black suit and silver tie, in a garbled, hoarse voice that made Sylvester Stallone sound like an Oxford professor, Valachi told a panel of shocked senators about his Mafia induction ceremony in 1930, then went on to outline the structure of a borgata, including its chain of command and the larger framework of La Cosa Nostra, which included multiple crime families spread out across the country with the bulk of its members, 50% of an estimated 5,000 soldiers, in the lower boroughs of New York. When Valachi named the 5 New York bosses who were in power at the time, the press ran with it, giving the Brigadas the names by which they are still known today. The Porfacci Brigada was now the Colombo family. Lucky Luciano's Brigada, after some years with Frank Costello in charge, was now the Genovese family. The Mangiano Brigada, after a brief turn with Albert Anastasia in charge, was now the Gambino family. The Reina Borgata, after being led for a time by Tom Gagliano, was peacefully bequeathed to Tommy Lucchese, thus the Lucchese family. The Bonanno family alone maintained the name of its original patriarch, as Joe Bonanno was still in charge. I feel like my sister is most likely fine. And I just need to tell myself, stop worrying. But I would feel so guilty if something happened because she came to see me. But there's 1,000 reasons her phone could be off. My sister asked me, have you ever seen Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul? And I said, nope. And she was like, oh, maybe you're right, Terry. That's a good point. She's like, wanted to say something about a lawyer to me because I had to get a lawyer. But I don't think she ever remembered like what it was, but she explained to me the premise of Breaking Bad and that there's a lawyer. And because I was like the Walter White person, is he like a good guy or like a bad guy? So, oh, he's a very bad guy, very bad. Oh, and I said, and the Saul guy, he must be a good guy, right? Because his name is Good Man, right? Or and that's why they named him that. And then she goes, no, no, it's not his real name. I mean, he changed his name to that because so he could be in commercials say, Saul Goodman. Wait, what? That's I don't know. You'll have to tell me if it's a good lawyer or a show I should watch. He's a lawyer, all right? She also tells me I should watch the movie John Wick. And I watched one episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which apparently is on for like a million seasons and counting, but it was funny. Anyway. Valachi, whose testimony was supported by local and federal law enforcement officers, spent a week on the witness stand recalling his 40-year criminal career. Sounding a lot like his puppeteer, Bobby Kennedy, Valachi said that he wanted to destroy the Cosa Nostra. When asked why, he did not attribute the need for its immediate demise to its many victims or the dire economic consequences to society, but said it was because the bosses have been very bad to the soldiers and they've been thinking for themselves. When one senator asked the loquacious thug what would happen to him if he went back to prison, Valachi replied that he would be dead in 5 minutes. Okay. Or more likely, he would kill another random inmate in 4 minutes and be placed back into protective custody. Although Joe Valachi was the first member of the American Mafia to openly expose the secret society, his congressional testimony led to no major prosecutions and amounted to a publicity broadcast introductory lecture on organized crime in America. There is some evidence to suggest that the FBI, which was already gathering intelligence from its black bag jobs and top hoodlum intelligence program, spoon-fed Valachi some of the information Hoover wanted transmitted to the American public now that he had no choice but to confront the decision to inform as if he himself was being fingered on a homicide. He now came up with a cover story to head off criticism that he had been asleep at his desk for 30 years. He penned a piece for Parade magazine that read, in part, the La Cosa Nostra, the secret murderous underworld combine, is no secret to the FBI. Although the statement was factually true, it contradicted decades of public denials. Bobby Kennedy knew that Hoover was making up for lost time while dodging accusations of ineptitude, but between the well publicized Appalachian Conference and the nationally televised Balachi hearings, Bobby now had all the public support he needed to annihilate the Mafia and drag Hoover out of the Dark Ages. As for the mob, they found themselves in the same position as the Cuban exiles. Nothing short of a miracle could save them. That miracle arrived when Carlos Marcello was introduced to David Ferry. Chapter 19, Master of Intrigue. David William Ferry was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1918. As a young man, he had ambitions of becoming a Catholic priest, but was thrown out of seminary school for erratic personal behavior. He ended up becoming an ordained bishop in the Orthodox Church of North America, which was not recognized by the Vatican. In 1941, Ferry graduated from Baldwin Wallace College with a BA in philosophy and earned a PhD from an unaccredited college in Bari, Italy. Besides philosophy and religion, Ferry studied Latin and Greek. Oh, I would love to study Latin and Greek. And had an interest in psychology, medicine, chemistry, hypnosis, and the occult. Well, don't we all? One of his many scientific pursuits was a cancer research program headquartered in his small, book filled New Orleans apartment, where hundreds of research mice scurried around in cages. A woman who knew and worked with Ferry said that tumors were implanted in the mice and that Ferry was working this program in concert with the CIA, which was interested in the possibilities of infecting people with cancer. Something we can easily imagine Dr. Gottlieb being interested in as he searched for untraceable ways to kill people. The CIA may have also been interested in Ferry's experiments with hypnotism, a major focus of the agency's Operation Bluebird. In 1951, Ferry became a proud pilot for Eastern Airlines, and he eventually flew covert missions for the CIA, delivering weapons to Castro's small band of guerrillas in the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Although the CIA backed Batista, it was hoping to curry favor with the rebels in the event of Castro's victory. After Castro seized power and established closer ties to the Soviet Union, eventually declaring himself a Marxist, Ferry felt personally betrayed and often spewed profanities at the Cuban leader. In his blanket hatred of communists, Ferry once worked himself up to the point of writing a letter to General Hale, commanding officer of the 1st Air Force, that read in part, "There is nothing that I would enjoy better than blowing the hell out of every damn Russian, communist, red, or what have you. Between my friends and we can cook up a crew that can really blow them to hell. I want to train killers. However bad that sounds, it's what we need." Fucking edgelord. Leading up to the Bay of Pigs invasion, Ferry flew CIA-backed bombing raids over Cuba and helped set up a military training camp outside of New Orleans for Cuban exiles who referred to him as the master of intrigue. because he delighted in weaving elaborate plots. Ferry put a lot of time and effort into preparing for the invasion, but after President Kennedy abandoned the Cuban brigade on the beaches, he felt personally betrayed. I see a picture of him here. I'll have to show you this a little. He does look nuts. He's got those crazy eyes. Hmm. Once again, announced spewed profanities at the president. Mm, calling him more dangerous than Castro, given Kennedy's occasion premier position on the world stage. The FBI later said that Ferry had occasionally stated that Kennedy ought to be shot. Ferry did not tone down his threatening rants while working as a pilot for Eastern Airlines, where he was suspected of luring underage boys onto airplanes he was piloting, then encouraging them to have sex with him. Oh my God. Oh my God. The experience must have been especially horrifying for the boys on account of Ferry's physical appearance. He suffered from alopecia, which in itself does not detract from human beauty, but Fairy wore a homemade red mohair wig that looked like a stray cat's bed, which he mounted on his scalp with plastic cement. What? 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 Oh, thank you, MM. I'm looking at the picture now. You don't see color, but the thing that stood out is his eyebrows. Um, that they're I'll show you. Okay. Um, he also wore false eyelashes and thick, uneven grease paint eyebrows. Beneath this creepy mess of his own doing were two beady eyes, narrow windows into a strange soul. After being arrested for having the sex with the minors, Eastern Airlines conducted an internal investigation of Ferry in September 1961 and decided to fire him. With the help of New Orleans attorney Ray Gill, Ferry filed a lawsuit against the airline. Curiously, and perhaps attributable to various connections with the US government, an Eastern Airlines memorandum stated that the airline's attorneys were contacted by two US congressmen who wanted to express to Eastern their interest in the ferry case and to explore the possibility of a compromise. The congressman indicated that they did not believe that Captain Ferry and Mr. Gill would be interested in a resignation as a compromise. Eastern Airlines was unmoved by the high powered push to reinstate Ferry and stuck with their decision to fire him. But Gill was so impressed with Ferry's private investigating skills and legal research abilities during the course of the case that he hired Ferry as his at his law office to help with other cases. One particular case Jill assigned Ferry to work on was the defense of his most prominent client, Carlos Marcello, who was fighting the federal fraud indictment brought against him at the instigation of Bobby Kennedy. Even before Ferry was introduced to Marcello, he would have certainly known about the Don's raging anger toward Bobby Kennedy, since the Kennedy Marcello feud was a highly publicized feature in the New Orleans press. We can only imagine, given Marcello's venomous rants against the Kennedys in Guatemala, Honduras, Grand Isle, and Churchill Farms, and given Ferry's loud, violent, and well documented threats toward the president, that the two were in good company and with nothing to curb their orgy of profanities but sheer oral exhaustion. Both men would have, moreover, found a large chorus among the Cuban exile community of Louisiana, which was, in terms of sheer numbers, second only to the Cuban exile community in Miami. According to Leighton Martins, a friend and ally of David Ferry and active supporter of Cuban militants, Cuban refugees were arriving in New Orleans at the rate of as many as 5,000 per day. This presents us with a question that has not to date been asked, but begs to be answered. Of all the places to settle in the United States, was it by chance or design that the most violent Cuban paramilitary groups in existence ended up in Florida and Louisiana, smack in the center of territories controlled by Santo Trafficante and Carlos Marcello? No, that is a good question. Marcello's early funding of the more radical Cuban exiles was not born of any nefarious intent and can even be considered patriotic as it perfectly aligned with America's national security interests. Like the CIA, the US military, and the State Department, Marcello wanted Castro dead so he could reclaim what he had lost in Cuba. An FBI report from April 1961 noted that Marcello pledged a substantial donation to the New Orleans Cuban exile leader, Sergio Archacha Smith, who headed the Cuban Revolutionary Council in New Orleans, and whose purpose was to establish a democratic government in Cuba through the use of military force. Arcacha Smith was described by the FBI as one of the more conspiratorial Cuban exile leaders, which placed him in excellent company with the master intriguer David Ferry. According to Arcacha Smith, Ferry had just shown up at my door one day offering to help. When Marcello began donating to the CRC, he was fairly confident that the CIA and the US military would help the exiles reclaim Cuba, and he expected in return for his investment favorable treatment in the way of gambling concessions, real estate development opportunities, and wholesale tomato sales for his Pelican Tomato Company, which already supplied the U.S. Navy. Once Castro was ousted, when these hopes were dashed at the Bay of Pigs, and again during the missile crisis, Marcello was clearly out of his investment, yet he continued to generously donate to the CRC. The question is why? What was the savvy mob boss expecting in return for his money? By February 1963, Kennedy's State Department launched a concerted effort to halt Cuban exile activities in accordance with the president's promise to Khrushchev. In March, the Coast Guard, Secret Service, and FBI teamed up with British authorities in the Bahamas, where they raided an exile training camp. By April, the Coast Guard sent more ships into the Florida Straits to cut off sabotage raids into Cuba. They boarded vessels and arrested exiles at gunpoint. After the U.S. government's funding of the CRC was abruptly halted, Sergio Arcacha Smith was in desperate need of money, as were other exiles, most of whom were poverty stricken. One historian wrote, for all the business community's desire to help liberate Cuba, the New Orleans locals, suffering from a depressed economy, had very little money to donate to the cause. A CIA officer who founded a fundraising organization, the Friends of Democratic Cuba, lamented, I got 2,000 empty cans to use for collecting contributions, but there was no interest. I think we made $5. Suddenly, however, Arcacha Smith found funding. According to exile Carlos Quiroga, David Ferry, who was now officially working as part of Marcello's legal defense team, was seen walking around with a crisp $100 bills, handing Arcacha Smith money whenever he needed it. Barry was never known for having extra money, which the consensus believed was coming directly from Carlos Marcello. When Barry was not working out of the office of G. Ray Gill, he was usually hanging around the office of Guy Bannister, where he also performed investigative work. Born in Louisiana in 1901, Guy Bannister was a special agent for the FBI for 20 years and had headed up the Bureau's Chicago office. Following his retirement in 1954, he was hired by the mayor of New Orleans, de Lesseps Shep Morrison, who was practically owned by Marcello, to address growing complaints of police corruption throughout the city. An honest investigation would have begun and ended with Marcello, but curiously went nowhere near him. Bannister later founded Guy Bannister and Associates, a private detective agency located at 544 Cap Street, where, among other functions, Bannister ran background checks on Cubans who wished to join Sergio Arcacha Smith's CRC, which was backed by the CIA and which was headquartered in the same corner building as Bannister's office. For Bannister, the work was not just business, but ideological. He belonged to the right-wing militia group, the Minutemen, and was a firm believer in the communist domino theory, which posited that if one Latin American country became communist, the rest could follow. His detective agency published one report called the Louisiana Intelligence Digest, self-described as a militantly conservative publication devoted to the exposure of the operations of the socialist and communist organizations in Louisiana and the dupes, fellow travelers, and do-gooders who give them aid and comfort. When Castro declared his revolution Marxist and cozied up to the Soviets, Bannister linked up with the Cuban underground in New Orleans, who were determined to oust the Beard. Driven by shared goals and a mutual hatred for President Kennedy based on real or perceived notions of betrayal, Bannister became fast friends with David Ferry, who had recently become fast friends with Carlos Marcello. Another young man often seen with Ferry inside Bannister's office was Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in New Orleans on October 18th, 1939. Boy, does this name sound familiar. Can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like he's going to be involved in something important. His father, Robert, dropped dead while Lee was still in his mother's womb. With 3 sons and no father, Lee's mother, Marguerite, struggled to survive until she dropped the boys off at the Bethlehem Children's Home. Lee was rejected because he was underage, so he went to live on and off with his mother's older sister, Lillian, and husband, Uncle Charles Dutz Moret, who was a known bookmaker in Carlos Marcello's Brigada. Dutz answered directly to Capos Nofia Pecora and Salvador Samsea, who Aaron Cohn of the New Orleans Crime Commission called the biggest and most powerful operator of illegal handbooks and other forms of illegal gambling in the city. Cohn also confirmed that Samsea was very close to Carlos Marcello. In December 1942, Marguerite reapplied for Lee's admission into the children's home. This time he was taken in, but Marguerite soon removed him and they relocated to Dallas, Texas. with her new fiance. The rest of Lee's childhood is a bleak catalog of domestic instability. He regularly moved between Dallas and New Orleans and attended 22 different schools. Throughout this trying time, the only balance in Lee's life seems to have been the Morettes, who were always ready to take him in when Marguerite was unable or unwilling to care for him. In 1954, the 15-year-old Oswald joined the New Orleans Civil Air Patrol as a cadet. One of its founders was David Harold Byrd, owner of the large Texas School Book Depository building, and a cousin of Senator Harry F. Byrd. Both Byrds were very close to Lyndon Johnson, and one of the Civil Air Patrol's captains and pilots was David Barry, who was present in at least one photograph with the young Oswald. Although we do not know much about Oswald and Barry's relationship during this early period. We knew he liked boys, right? Sorry, but red flag, red flag. In fact, we do know is Ferry was a hypnotist and inveterate. Can I say the word pedophile? While who was fired from Eastern Airlines for preying on young men, and that Oswald's fatherless and erratic domestic background made him the poster child for vulnerability. In 1955, Oswald quit school for the last time and tried to enlist in the Marine Corps, but was turned down because of his youth. The next year, he tried again and was accepted with the help of his mother, who signed a parental waiver for her underage son. From July 1957 to October 1958, Oswald was stationed at the highly secret Atsugi Naval Air Station near Tokyo, Japan, where he curiously learned to read and speak Russian. Oswald seems to have been highly intelligent, and since ancient times, there has been a belief in the link between genius and madness, which may explain why, in 1958 alone, Oswald was court martialed twice and suffered a nervous breakdown. Well, then why am I not a genius? Though life is unfair, I just get the madness. In 1959, Oswald requested a special hardship discharge so he could care for his mother, who became ill. He was granted a discharge in September and defected to the Soviet Union in October via Finland. That same month, a friend presented him with a copy of Fyodor. Let's see if I can figure this out. Dostoevsky's The Idiot for his birthday. The gift would prove incredibly prescient, given that the novel's protagonist, Lev Myshkin, was a brilliant young man who the world mistook for an idiot. In 1960, while living in the Soviet Union, Oswald married a Russian woman, Marina Nikolayevna. He eventually became disenchanted with Russian communism and returned to the United States with his new wife. In June 1962, they settled in Fort Worth, Texas. Oddly, the U.S. State Department not only permitted Oswald's return, but even extended him a loan, as if he had embarked upon a harmless hiking trip across the Alps that left him short on cash. We are left to wonder if he had truly defected or was working as a double agent for the United States government. Well, I mean, how big was the loan? And I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. The government gives loans all the time. Upon his return to the States, the FBI interviewed Oswald and opened a file on him, which probably means they were not privy to any State Department secrets, but were eager to find out more. On April 24th, 1963, Oswald was living and working in Dallas when the White House announced that the president would visit the city in November. That same day, Oswald boarded a bus for New Orleans, where he crashed at Aunt Lillian and Uncle Dutz's home in the mob run French Quarter. Uncle Dutz put Oswald to work as a runner for his bookmaking operation, which meant that Oswald was essentially working for Carlos Marcello. In late April, Oswald was seen accepting money from one of Marcello's soldiers inside the restaurant of Marcello's Town and Country Motel. It is quite possible that this was normal gambling transaction related to his job as a runner, or was it something more sinister? A short distance up the highway from Marcello's Town and Country Motel was a bar owned by Bernard Ben Tregle. Tregle ran a gambling book for Marcello and also displayed Marcello's slot machines and jukeboxes inside his establishment, which is believed to have been part owned by Marcello. In April 1963, Eugene de La Parra, who was close with Marcello's brothers and worked at Ben Tregle's bar, was present for a conversation between Tregle and several other Marcello associates. Tregle was viewing an advertisement for a rifle in a detective magazine when he suddenly looked up at the group and said, "This would be a nice rifle to buy and get the president. There is a price on the president's head. Somebody will get Kennedy when he comes down south." De La Parra, who was an ex-Marine and a reliable FBI informant, reported the conversation to his handlers. Once again, as in the case of Jose Elman, who had reported Santo Traficante's similar remark in Florida, nothing was done about it. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Looking at your guy with the hat. Okay, I'll give you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I just want to make sure I got this right in my head. Um, so he's viewing an advertisement and set in a detective magazine, and he suddenly looks up and just proclaims, "This would be a nice rifle to buy and get the president." Okay. Okay. In July 1963, Bannister printed up a box of leaflets that urged people to join the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And by the way, that guy, the Tregle guy, that wasn't even, he was with Marcel anyway. Which was supposedly sympathetic to Castro's communist cause. The address printed on uh, Edley, or on the back of the leaflets, was the office of Bannister, who was ironically an ardent anti-communist. It seems that Bannister was attempting to ferret out communist sympathizers who would unwittingly show up at his door. The leaflets were distributed on the street by Oswald, and when Bannister's secretary asked Bannister why Oswald, who she knew from Bannister's office, was distributing pro Castro leaflets, Bannister replied, "He's with us." Besides uncovering communists, Bannister may have had an additional motive to distribute the leaflets, which had to do with reinforcing Oswald's reputation as an active leftist, since Bannister or someone else arranged to have Oswald photographed and filmed. Yeah, because there's a picture here. Oswald hands out leaflets in what many believe to have been a staged event. Huh, okay. Adding more mystery to this already strange situation, Oswald got into a street fight with Cuban exiles who were offended by his public recruitment drive, though skeptics believe that the fight was staged. After being arrested, Oswald made an unusual request to speak with the FBI, then used his one telephone call to dial Uncle Dutz, asking him to call on his underworld connections to spring him from jail. Oswald was soon bailed out by Emile Breneau, who also paid Oswald's fine. Breneau, besides being a close associate of Uncle Dutz, was also close with Nofio Pecora and Joe Pareto, both of whom were high ranking members of Marcelo's Brigada. Also, in July, a group of Cuban exiles traveled from Miami to New Orleans, where they practiced guerrilla warfare at a training camp constructed on a sprawling property owned by a known Mafia associate who was directly connected to Carlos Marcelo. By the summer of 1963, there were at least six Cuban exile training camps that doubled as munitions depots near or around Louisiana's Lake Pontchartrain. One of the main camps was located on the property of William McLeany, who once owned a tourist agency in Havana, Cuba, but was run out of town by Castro. William's brother, Michael McLeany, was partners with the mob in Havana, where he had owned a large share of Meyer Lansky's Hotel Nacional, the site of the mob's 1946 conference. After Castro took power and locked up a number of mobsters, Michael McLeany was briefly detained in a Havana jail, like Santo Trafficante, and later escaped the island. Also like Trafficante, but unlike Trafficante, whose loyalties were questionable, McLeany, upon his return to the States, became a true believer in Cuban exiles' bid to repatriate their homeland. He put a steep bounty on Castro's head and lined up a fleet of private planes to bomb Cuba's confiscated oil refineries, but was talked out of it by American oil companies who, anticipating Castro's demise, hoped to reclaim the structures intact. On July 31st, the FBI launched a raid on William McLeany's Lake Pontchartrain property in accordance with the Kennedy administration's merciless crackdown on Cuban exile paramilitary groups. Agents confiscated over a ton of dynamite, napalm, and other explosives created for shipment to Cuba. The FBI took 11 men into custody, including Sam Benton, who was a close associate of Santa Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli. New Orleans newspapers reported the raid and detailed the curious cache of explosives it had turned up, but for some reason that has never been explained, all of the men were promptly released without being charged with a single crime, and despite being in possession of enough illegal explosives to launch the island of Cuba into outer space. It seems that CIA agents who were still working with these men had intervened on their behalf. Although David Ferry was not at the McLeany property during the raid, assuming he did not hide or escape, he is believed to have trained exiles there, taught them how to fly and use various weapons, and helped finance the training camp. Anyone familiar with the expenses required to run a single household can only imagine the costs involved in just feeding an entire camp such as this one. As noted earlier, when the government cut off the exiles' funding, men like Sergio Arcachis Smith, David Ferry, and Guy Bannister, whose office was referred to as Grand Central Station for militant Cuban exiles, were in desperate need of money. Also, as noted earlier, Marcelo's empire was reported to rake in over $1 billion annually. If any one man in New Orleans had the financial means to replace lost government funding, it was Carlos Marcello. Although the hidden details of exactly what was happening in New Orleans may never come to light, here's what we do know. In the summer and fall of 63, David Ferry, who despised the Kennedy brothers so much as Carlos Marcello did, was regularly meeting with the Louisiana Don at his town and country headquarters to supposedly strategize for his upcoming trial. At the same time, Ferry was also meeting with angry Cuban exiles who felt treacherously betrayed by President Kennedy and were somehow transformed from cherished symbols of freedom to criminal targets of the Kennedy administration. Ferry was, moreover, regularly meeting with a retired right wing FBI agent and right wing militant with obvious ties to the CIA, Guy Bannister, who despised President Kennedy for his disloyalty to America's Cold War values. And Ferry and Bannister were seen in the company of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was supposedly infatuated with communism, even though it is quite difficult to imagine him expressing this political passion in the presence of Ferry and Bannister, who, if they believed him, would have beaten him to death with a hammer and sickle. Jeez! Whoa! Whatever we choose to make of this bizarre confluence of strange individuals, nothing binds men more powerfully than mutual hatred of a common enemy. A perfect storm was brewing in Louisiana. Chapter 19, Sparky from Chicago. Oh, my sister texted me. It's a picture, but she's all right. All right. Okay. I feel better. Thank you. Thank you, MM. What does 7.3 look like? My foot's. No sooner were the Bay of Pigs prisoners ransomed from Castro and back in Miami than Bobby Kennedy said to one of his employees who asked for a day off, "What about Hoffa?" While overseeing the rackets committee, Bobby had failed despite 1,500 witnesses and 20,000 pages of testimony to pin anything on Jimmy Hoffa. Bobby took it personally and promised his colleagues the game isn't over. After becoming Attorney General, it was time for a rematch. Bobby instructed Walter Sheridan, an ex FBI agent who had also worked for the National Security Agency, to set up a special unit to combat labor racketeering, with a particular focus on Jimmy Hoffa. She says, I'm safe, went into Sequoia this morning, and just left, so no service all day. How are you? Oh, okay. Oh, Sequoia, yeah, they wouldn't have reception. There you go. The squad would become known as the Get Hoffa Squad, head of the organized crime section. Edwin Silberling thought that Bobby's choice of Walter Sheridan was rather odd, you know. Sheridan wasn't a lawyer. He didn't have any legal training, but he was handpicked by Bobby. There was actually nothing odd about it. Sheridan was a dogged investigator who was not afraid to skirt the boundaries of the law and, if need be, cross the line. He was known to lean on witnesses and even threaten the wives of potential witnesses with imprisonment if their husbands did not testify. Sheridan was also reckless as Bobby when it came to targeting powerful enemies. In April 1961, an internal memo, Sheridan wrote that in addition to mobsters, his squad would go after so called legitimate people, both in the business world and in government service, without whose cooperation these people could not operate. This would include employees of the federal investigative and regulatory agencies who are being paid off, congressmen and senators who are collaborating, bank officials, and businessmen. Edwin Silberling, who thought Bobby just wasn't cut out to be a lawyer, was uncomfortable with the direction the Justice Department was taking and no longer wanted to pursue Bobby's personal vendettas. He resigned after 2 years, but most of Bobby's attorneys went along for the ride. Sure, we had a vendetta, a member of the Get Hoffa squad later commented, but you have to understand how terrible this guy was. We weren't Nazis, but I guess in this day and age, I'd have problems if other people organized a squad like this, specifically against some other guy. William Hunley, who was Walter Sheridan's boss at the criminal division, said, I'd hate to see a group like the Hoffa squad become any sort of precedent. I think in our case, it wasn't abused only because of the people involved. Whether or not Hunley and Sheridan were able to responsibly persecute someone as they believed, we cannot blame Hoffa for feeling singled out. He complained, they go to school and investigate my kid. They go around to his friends and say, how many suits of clothes has Jim Hoffa got? How much money does he carry in his pocket? They gave orders to every airline office in the country. When Hoffa makes a reservation, call the nearest FBI office and give the time he takes off and the time he arrives. You wouldn't believe some of the creepy stuff they're pulling. Hoffa purchased thousands of copies of George Orwell's 1984 and sent them to union locals across the country, telling them that Orwell's grim prediction was already happening under Bobby Kennedy, whose treatment of potential witnesses did nothing to assuage Hoffa's corrupt practices in Detroit. Franco said that the Get Hoffa squad illegally broke into his home, cuffed him, and brought him to Bobby, who told him, I want information from you. I don't care whether it's hearsay or fantasies or what. I want anything you can give me that I can use to bring Hoffa to trial. Bobby promised to put Franco in prison for a long time if he did not comply, telling the recent widower, "What I'm going to do is take your 4 children away from you and put them in an orphanage and have you declared an unfit father." Yeah, I've never read 1984. Once, when Walter Sheridan was pressuring a Hoffa loyalist into testifying against him in return for a pass on pending criminal charges, Sheridan said, "We need some help, and you can help us." "Well, what the hell do you mean I can help you?" Or, "Yeah, can you help? Can I help you?" asked the loyalist. "Do you want me to phony up a charge to get out of the trouble I'm in?" "You're a big boy," answered Sheridan, meaning he could figure it out for himself. Bobby and his Get Hoffa squad also launched investigations into Hoffa's attorneys, violating Hoffa's civil rights, specifically his Sixth Amendment right to counsel. The investigations, beyond being spiteful, were used as a scare tactic to dissuade attorneys from representing Hoffa in court. Attorney Edward Bennett Williams had anticipated this injustice when he said, "If Jack Kennedy is elected president, I guess I'd better apply for a passport." Bobbies defended his mistreatment of attorneys, telling one reporter, "Lawyers who take their money from the Teamsters are legal prostitutes." In search for powerful allies, Hoffa drew closer to Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante, whose innocent wife was also subpoenaed by Bobby, placing her in the company of Marcello's wife, who was still under a suffocating tax lien. Attorney Frank Regano, who represented Trafficante for the better part of 4 decades, was also often asked by Trafficante to deliver messages to Marcello and Hoffa, both of whom Regano also represented, though less frequently. In February 1963, Trafficante was complaining about the Kennedys when he told Regano, "Somebody is going to kill those sons of bitches. It's just a matter of time." Regano, who had also heard Marcello and Hoffa curse the Kennedy brothers, felt that his clients had every right to feel angry, but assumed they were just hot tempered men blowing off steam. Then, one day, as Regano wrapped up a case with Hoffa and was leaving to visit Marcello and Trafficante in New Orleans, Hoffa said to Regano, "Something has to be done. The time has come for your friend, Trafficante, and Carlos Marcella to get rid of him. Kill that son of a bitch, John Kennedy." Knowing how worked up Hoffa would become over the Kennedys, Regano thought nothing of it. When he arrived in New Orleans and was seated at a dinner table with the Southern mob bosses, he relayed Hoffa's message, thinking he would give them a laugh. "Hoffa wants you to do a little favor for him," Regano said, queuing up the punchline. "You won't believe this, but he wants you to kill John Kennedy." Regano waited for them to laugh and was shocked to see them exchange icy glances across the table. According to Regano, "I had blindly intruded into a minefield that I had no right to enter. That without my knowledge, the thought of killing the president had already seriously crossed their minds." Regano was relieved when the waiter appeared, offering him the opportunity to change the subject. Okay, I think we'll pick it up here tomorrow. We didn't finish this chapter and have some pages more to go, but chapter 20 is going to be called tomorrow. The hit heard around the world. So I think we get to where he thinks I think we know that he thinks that hit was ordered, don't we? All right, let me show you that picture. that guy with he's got these like Ronald McDonald looking eyebrows, and I was like, "There's something strange about how he looks," but especially when they said beady eyes, looks like he's got black eyes. Like, you ever see those old school Little Orphan Annie, the cartoons in the pages? But it's black and white. You can't see like the red hair or anything. But she had those the way the eyes were drawn, and people that have eyes like that, he looks kooky. Like, I'll find him. Oh, thank you. Okay, look at this. This is that David Ferry. It's like the one that likes the Boy Scouts or whatever. But I'm like, there's something wrong with his eyebrows. The hair, I guess. What did they say? Like plastered it on or something? I'm trying to imagine the color. He said it was like some type of red. I can only imagine the eyebrows were intended to match. Let's see if I got any other. Nothing but yeah, that's uh, the way that this one isn't like a in the middle. They do like little pictures as we go along. They had one that had oh, this was the Larry Gallo in a squad car with a rope burn around his neck. Remember when they tried to kill him? And you can see it on his neck. I thought that was interesting. Like, yeah, they wanted you, fella. I'd be looking like that too. Like the fuck, fuck my life. That was that sleeping with the fish. Number fudgy. I liked this one. This picture. No, no, not this. This is a different one. Here we go. I like this picture. This is that Cal Neva Lodge when I was trying to say visualize California, Nevada. Like that house right there, right down the middle. It's an interesting house to be in two states, but I'm sure it's not really like that, right? I don't think they'd zone it in the middle. Like a house could do that. Maybe a different time. I wanted to show you one other. And you got Hoffa. Mm. Yeah, this was that picture when I said about John F. Kennedy and his naval patrol boat. Um, right, if he saved those people or whatever, but it's it's the aviators, man. uh, we'll say I guess it gets sunny in the ocean, but um, yeah. Thank you for being patient with me finding my microphone. Pick it up there tomorrow. Now that I'm back this week, magic marker eyebrows. Yeah, I love you so much.